Welcome to today's Corporate Venturing Insider series. Today, I'm very happy to have the Managing Director of Btomorrow Ventures, Annie Goman, with us. Annie, welcome.
Thank you, Nicolas. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm a new fan of the podcast, so grateful to have the opportunity to speak to your listeners.
Always happy to have new fans. So, Annie, could you please share a little bit about your journey? How did you get into corporate venturing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think if you look at my CV, you might think I got into corporate venturing back in 2014 when I joined ZX Ventures, which was the growth incubation arm of AB and Bev at the time. But actually, I was part of the e-commerce team and not directly involved in venturing. It was ZX was more the branding name for the various innovation verticals within ABI. So I actually only got into venturing within the last 9 months, having taken on the managing director role within Btomorrow Ventures, which is the corporate venture capital arm of British American Tobacco, or BAT, listed here in the UK, FTSE 10 company. Why did I get into venturing? I think my background has always really been working for large corporates and having that focus on innovation. And I think here at BAT, we've got a huge transformation journey ahead of us. No one's it's a surprise to no one that the primary category that BAT is known for, the cigarette, is in decline. And we've got a big transformation to switch consumers to what we call our smokeless products, which is our vapor, tobacco heating, and modern oral, the nicotine pouches. Those products, and a real big strive to our 2035 ambition to reach 50% revenue from smokeless products. And I think there's no question that there's really innovative startups who are transforming that agenda, who can help us achieve that and at the forefront of innovation. So I think that's really important to me personally. Is the one, I guess, golden thread throughout my career has been, how do you transform? How do you help big companies with global footprints innovate? And often the solution has been, let's maybe try and do this internally. But I think certainly where I've leaned into is there's external people who are doing this faster. And then you have this really interesting challenge of this huge corporate which moves slowly but very effectively, and then these innovative startups, and how do you bridge the gap? And I think it sounds interesting on paper, but I'm sure lots of your listeners are familiar with that challenge that it presents between the clash of the two cultures, working styles. And I'm really passionate about bridging that, because I think both have something to offer the other, finding the sweet spot and being able to kind of marry the innovative approach to solving business problems that a startup can offer with the scale, with the expertise, with the resource that the corporate can offer. I guess more personally, how did I get into this role? I'm really lucky that I have a boss who perhaps saw something that I didn't. Personally, I wouldn't have put myself forward for BTV's managing director role. I don't have investing experience. I don't have venture capital experience. My background is more working within the commercial teams within the CPG companies. So I, for a little while, had a specialism developing in e-commerce and direct to consumer. So I think to take the managing director role at Btomorrow Ventures, despite never really being an investor, I think my manager and our chief business development officer here at BAT, I think, saw something in perhaps the moment in time BTV was in, perhaps the softer skills and links that I had to the corporate, and sort of said, hey, Annie, I think you can do this role. For me personally, it was a bit of a leap of faith, but I've been really happy ever since. And it's not the first time I've jumped into a role without having prior experience. So from a imposter syndrome, I was well used to this feeling. My last role at AB and Bev between 2021 and 2023 was leading a HR team despite having no HR experience. I then joined BAT to lead the cannabis, the global head of cannabis role and managing our portfolio of cannabis investments, having had no cannabis experience. So this was kind of my third time doing a senior role within an organization without really having the necessary experience. So I think a good lesson in hopefully learning agility, but also recognizing that, I guess, to be a leader, you don't always need the subject matter expertise, and there's other things you can bring to the role. So I'm definitely a unique managing director, and I think what I'm really grateful to be on this podcast, to have met people at various conferences from TDK Ventures, because I'm very much growing my network in the CVC space, in the VC world. I know how important that is to be successful, and I'm starting from scratch. So this is a really great place to sort of hopefully build more connections and have more people hear our story here at Btomorrow Ventures.
It's amazing. I think I have so many questions now in mind. Um, and I think the fact you have fresh eyes on corporate venturing also means I can ask questions, which is going to be really first reaction. So that's really, really cool. And if I understand your journey, so you were at ZX Ventures, but not part of the CVC activity, but the e-commerce activity. So you were close enough to see what they were doing, but not involved in the day-to-day.
Correct. ZX Ventures at the time I was there, and it's evolved since. Had kind of 5 verticals. They had direct to consumer, which was kind of what it says on the tin. B2B e-commerce, so recognizing that to sell to an Ocado and Amazon required a different skill set to perhaps the traditional route to market. So a team dedicated to that. And the third one was what they called adjacencies, which was kind of the beyond beer products that were like beer in the alcohol space, but weren't. They then had the pure venturing arm, which kind of this audience will be very familiar with. And then the final one was home brewing, which was probably the part of the business which had the shortest runway. But certainly during the time I was there, whilst I wasn't involved in the team making the investments, a lot of the time my team were post deal, we're working on the integration, we're working on the support. A lot of the businesses, particularly in the direct to consumer space, were looking to expand into B2B commerce. So worked very closely with the founders and with the startups, and almost that sort of more longevity of relationship, because it was the post-investment aftercare, which the team at the time were very good at.
So that's what we call the portfolio program team at TDK Ventures, where after the investments, we make sure there is a team that can facilitate all the synergies between the startups we invest in, the portfolio, and the mothership. Maybe you could share some of the learnings you had, the challenges, because there's like an impedance match or mismatch between what the startups want to do and how fast they want to do it, and the mothership. Anything that you learned in terms of best practices for the audience?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think I look back at what ZX did, and it was almost quite ahead of its time. It wasn't called portfolio growth or portfolio development, and obviously that was started in 2014. Before, I think, well, at least to my understanding, that concept was really developed within the VC CVC world, and it was all about growth and aligning behind a common goal. And I think the team responsible for that within ZX were very good at, I guess, being that bridge between the corporate and the startup. I think being part of the umbrella team, ZX Ventures, was really positive because you sort of had that buffer between the corporate and the mothership. The corporate and the startup. And being, I think, almost over investing, the team supporting e-commerce were certainly equipped to integrate the capabilities of the startup. And I think I'm seeing some of that now, and I'm trying to bring some of those learnings to Btomorrow Ventures, because I think so much of the focus previously had been on the pre and the deal itself, whereas actually, and certainly my background and where I feel like I personally can lend more expertise really is in that post-investment stage and taking a company doing 10 million to 100 million. And that's something I think ZX and ABI were very good at. Lots of the companies who were invested in were then integrated into the corporate once they reached a certain scale. So having those success stories, I think, has given me the confidence that there's a proven model to this working. Now let's explore that at BAT as well, at Btomorrow Ventures. Because it's not something traditionally the CVC fund within BAT has focused on. So we're really excited to start exploring this. And certainly our founders are asking for it. I think we, of course, as being a corporate investor, you're largely considered to be a strategic and to have benefits perhaps a VC investor wouldn't have. And whilst we've had certain partnerships and collaborations with the startups, I think we're excited to sort of take this to the next level and have more of a systematic offering we can give our startups, both connecting them within to BAT partners, but also what are the areas perhaps where BAT aren't the experts, and how do we plug that in? And that was something ZX did very well, was provide expertise and support to the startups, either from either from AB and Bev, or they connected them to external parties. So certainly taking that as food for thought as we expand into Btomorrow Ventures.
Is there any best practice you had at ZX Ventures you're using now at Btomorrow Ventures on the engagements between startups and portfolio companies? Or maybe something that didn't quite work and you improved it at Btomorrow Ventures? You choose.
It's a good question. I think because we're quite early on in our exploration of portfolio development at Btomorrow, and the two companies are quite different. I think if I looked at AB and Bev, where the investments were largely made by ZX Ventures, there was a lot of synergies. So a plug and play model, this is, let's introduce you to this person, or run this initiative. It was very, it was plug and play is the best word to use, I think. Whereas if we think about some of the portfolio companies that Btomorrow Ventures have invested in, they're not necessarily, they're more, they're not necessarily fully related to our core business or our core offering. If you think we're not investing in cigarettes, we're looking to invest in what we call beyond nicotine, which is our portfolio of functional food and drinks. BAT don't have the infrastructure or the distribution or the retail expertise when it comes to distributing full-size beverages across various countries, or what the category management looks like for functional snacks. So that kind of plug and play model isn't necessarily what we can offer our founders. So it's about, I guess, being really intentional with how BAT is a strategic, what expertise we have that can support our founders, as well as to the point I mentioned, well, if BAT in the future want to start selling functional drinks and functional beverages, which is something we're both exploring organically, but also exploring through our portfolio of investments, what are some of the capabilities we perhaps might want to invest in as Btomorrow Ventures, or incubate alongside our partners through external expertise? So I think that's a really interesting challenge. Just the level of transformation that BAT is trying to do means some of the capabilities our startups require, we don't necessarily have that expertise in yet. So I think it makes our role as a corporate investor even more exciting, because we're not just investing in products or brands. It's also what are the capabilities that are going to help us become a multinational CPG company.
Yeah, I can see a really nice difference between your two experiences. One is a more of an exploitation type of mission where it's plug and play. You can see which business company or business group would want to work with a startup, and there is a clear fit. Here at Btomorrow, you're more on the exploration, where you're not in, but you want to go. At that point, you may not have actually a business group ready to go and engage. And so the challenges are different.
Correct. And also, it's about thinking, do BAT want to own that part of the value chain? We're not expert yet in last mile delivery. Do we ever want to own that? But equally, how do we get a front row seat to really understand that channel, sell better, more effectively to our consumers? Same for full size beverages. We're probably, if you think about our value chain for our nicotine products, we don't own distribution. But if you think about beverages, the part of that success, especially in the US, is understanding the distribution network and the 3-tier system, etc. To truly partner when you're, I guess, a challenger brand, how do you get a front row seat? How do you become deep in the levels of partnership? And I therefore think it makes our role as a corporate investor even more exciting, because it's also the ancillary capabilities that will help us grow our brands and our products faster that we're looking at. And I think, and again, it highlights to me one of the reasons why I'm so excited about venturing and really grateful to be a part of it, is the level of transformation BAT are undergoing is compelling, and it's very real. And the role that we could play as Btomorrow, would love to look back in 15, 20 years and say, wow, we really helped transform a legacy tobacco company to be a multi-category CPG company. And that's very much the ambition of the whole group.
I think I'm getting a glimpse of what your boss saw in you for the role.
Yeah.
So, but I think there is something inspiring you said, which I want to touch, because you talked about the imposter syndrome. You talked about taking that leap of faith multiple times, going into a role you don't have the experience. I think HR could be actually the first one, a good example where you would make the assumption anyone going to HR in a management uh, setup would have HR experience. And same for corporate venturing. Those who are listening might say, there's no way I can become the lead of a CVC unless I've done CVC before. Uh, can you speak a little bit to the imposter syndrome you mentioned and how this may be helpful or not helpful and how you mitigate it? Because I think most people feel that leap of faith moving into a new role, when actually that's actually probably the best way to accelerate your career, but also grow as an individual.
Yeah, and I remember the conversation I had with my to-be boss when he presented the offer to me to join take the HR position back in 2021. Really, for the last 10 years, I developed this expert career path. I've become an expert in e-commerce, B2B selling, digital, direct to consumer. And that was really where I saw my career path. But it was a very common thing at AB and Bev, which is a real strength of the company to challenge people to take leaps of faith. So the move into a different area perhaps wasn't as uncommon at ABI, but I think certainly jumping from digital e-commerce to people perhaps wasn't necessary, but that was quite a big jump. And I remember my boss talking to me at the time, and I was quite in shock because he was a chief of the company. He was a chief direct consumer officer. So not only was it a brand new function, but the exposure I had now working from a kind of a vice president being my boss to a chief being my boss was quite a big jump. But I guess I've always trusted in the companies that I've worked for that know me quite well, who can sort of perhaps see things that I don't, and connecting those dots. And what really did help was that the area that I was working for in the HR side of things was the direct to consumer digital space. So I brought the business lens to HR. I think if I was going into a HR role for operations or finance and a part of the business where really wasn't a subject matter expertise, that level of imposter syndrome would have been huge. But almost I was taking my business context and understanding and applying it in a new environment. And one thing that's consistent across both companies is I've always really enjoyed the people that I've worked with. And it felt like I got a chance to stay in that organization that I was really a part of, but I had this chance to take on a new challenge. And I've always been passionate about people as a line manager. That's been one of my key things, is how do you create environments for people to be successful, caring about the individual, listening to them, how do they work, and how do you adapt your management style to get the best out of them? So again, it just felt like a different way of achieving something I'm very passionate about, which is how do you create a direct to consumer organization that has the right reward structure for differentiated talent, the right recruiting process, because direct to consumer was largely hiring for talent that was different to ABI. 900 of the 1,500 employees of that organization were developers, tech-based employees that would want a different remuneration policy, a different career progression policy to most of ABI. So again, it was this really exciting business challenge that I was really excited to be a part of. And I think because I knew people within the organization, I developed, I guess, a reputation for myself over the last sort of 8 years of working there. That imposter syndrome or that kind of nervousness around taking the position, it was there, but it wasn't kind of overwhelming. I think where I probably felt it the strongest was leaving AB and Bev and starting at BAT. So brand new company, zero network, joining a senior position and having to learn a brand new category in the form of cannabis. I think that's where personally I found the hardest, because so much of how I navigated success at AB and Bev was texting someone, putting someone on Slack, hey, can you do me a favor? Because you'd known them, you've been around the blocks. Whereas how do I be successful at BAT when I have zero network and no one to call in a favor for? But a real testament to the company, I think, is everyone's very willing to help and make time for you. And I was pretty overwhelmed from the beginning at how much people wanted you to succeed in the company. They'd make time for you, they'd support you in ways that I wasn't used to. So I think BAT as a company were really helpful in helping me land and be successful. And I think the same for the cannabis industry. Lots of people are very welcoming. It's a fairly, in terms of the maturation of the category, it's in its early stages. So any kind of institutional support is very much welcome. So again, it that helped too. And by the third time, I was a little bit used to it. I guess I'd been at the company 2 years before taking on the Btomorrow Ventures managing director role. So people knew me, they knew what to expect. And I guess I'd had a small proven track record. So that made it a little bit easier. And again, what helped me land this time was a really, really strong team underneath me, a very strong chief investment officer who's been at the company for a number of years, who's been pretty much at BTV since day one, so really understands our portfolio, a strong chief legal officer, and also finance support. So really lucky in that respect. That allowed me to perhaps focus on the areas where I could add value, which is more on what's the long-term strategy, how do we anchor into the corporate strategy, whilst also recognizing we need to drive change and therefore be different. And the key message I guess I've landed to the team in my 9 months of being here is we're got to manage these two tensions of being for the business, but also driving change. And to drive change, you've got to do things differently. So getting the balance right, I think, is challenging, but also bringing people on the journey. So the balance is probably a word I use quite a lot when it comes to BTV and the challenge we face, both balancing the corporate and the startup, and also balancing making sure we bring people on the journey, not in an isolating way, but also challenge and change, because we're not going to achieve our big ambitions if we do things the same as we've done.
I love it. I love it. And I've met your team, so it's a great team, and they really know what they are doing, and they are very trusted and respected in the ecosystem. So you definitively start with a really good team. And when you describe your journey, I feel like third time a charm, which is, even though it's only 9 months, even though it's a leap of faith and it's a new role, it feels like you're already comfortable, very clear about your goals. Your team is resonating with that mission of exploration. How are you thinking about Btomorrow Ventures 5 years from now? I mean, clearly 15 years from now, you want to be able to trace back some key changes, but I'm sure you have a in-between type of goals. And an exploration mission is very tough because it's about exploring where the company is not yet. How do you see a 5-year milestone where you would be proud of you and your team?
It's a good question. And part of the focus over the last 9 months has been positioning us for success for the next 5 years, because we've had our fund two. It was committed last year, but I think me coming in as a new managing director, taking a moment to pause and think, where are we now? Where do we want to be? Led to almost 9 months of reorganization and reprioritizing. So we did spend quite a lot of time doing that deep work of what worked from fund one, what do our portfolio companies say about us, what do our internal stakeholders say about us, and what are we doing well and we should keep doing, and what should we do better. So we've landed in a spot now where we've started to think, okay, based on that, what does fund two, which is BAT's £200 million commitment to continuing to invest in minority investments, what does that look like? And for the first time, we're sort of got a more broad mandate, which means we can support the wider transformation agenda of BAT. So historically, we've been more focused on the beyond nicotine side of investments, whereas now, as I mentioned, we're looking at how we support our smokeless nicotine portfolio. So our nicotine pouch business, vapor business, heated tobacco business, and also the capabilities that underpin a multinational CPG company. So be it really understanding the parts of the value chain that BAT want to be expert in but aren't yet. So in terms of success, I think the number one thing for me is I'd love for fund two, I'd like to have deployed it to have a successful portfolio companies who are now part of our ecosystem. Sometimes, as you're probably familiar and your audience might be aware, corporates can change, can pivot. a fund two approach was agreed, and we've then spent the last 9 months really evaluating that and pivoting. So for me, I want that consistency. I've sort of said to the team, we're going to be operating on what we call a high alignment, high autonomy operating model. We spent those 9 months getting the alignment with the corporate, really understanding where we're going to play and how we're going to win. And now success for me is having the ability for the team to deploy that. Of course, having that check-ins with the corporate, and I see my role as the managing director, ensuring we're constantly listening to BAT and feeding that strategy back in. But the idea is we have this strong anchor in our Fund 2 thesis, which gets deployed over the next 5 years and allows the team to continuing to invest without pivots or meaningful changes that can be quite disruptive. So I guess thinking about Fund 2, we'd like in 5 years to have deployed Fund 2, to have a commitment for Fund 3 from the corporate, because we've been successful. Some of our Fund 1 investments are maturing, and success for BAT and for BTV is we use the word integration. That might not necessarily be an acquisition. That might be a integration of technology. If we look at some of our investments in the digital AI shelf space, that's more about how do we integrate that capability across the entire BAT ecosystem. But if we look at our consumer brands, a functional beverage brand in the US, or a functional snacking brand in Brazil, is that success for us would be, well, that's a pipeline potential integration acquisition for BAT. So success would be fully realizing that within the next 5 years. Of course, there could be potential for Fund 2 investments to mature and realize, but given the life cycle and where we'll be investing, that might take the next 5 years for those to become integrated within BAT. But we certainly see ourselves as the bridge to innovation, partnering with our BAT colleagues and being known internally too for providing access to some of the most innovative startups and people who are disrupting the categories that we play in. So that would be success for me. And having our team continue to remain engaged and motivated. I think so much of CVC and working with startups and portfolio companies is about relationships. And I know when you have turnover, that can be disruptive. So we've got a great team. We are bringing in some new talent in the next few months. And I think making sure that team stay engaged and motivated and establish those long-term partnerships with the startups, because as I've been saying to our friends at BAT, we're here for the long game. This is all about the next 5 to 10 years. And I think having a consistent team partnering with our startups is a really important piece of that too.
Nice. I'm realizing, first, you're very thoughtful, but two, you got into the role without rushing it. You took 9 months to think about the strategy. You talk about high alignment, which means you really made sure that whatever you're building is highly aligned with the mothership and their expectations. And there's one thing you said, which I want to double click, which is the right to win, how to win. Can you share a little bit more about that focus and how it's actually translated into execution?
Yeah, so I think obviously my team are investors. So I think me coming in and saying, team, we're going slow in order to go fast, I think it was received with some trepidation, because I kind of said to them, we're not doing deals for the next 6 to 9 months. We ended up in the latter part of that. So think about that what you will. But now I think it resonates. I think I said to the team, I'm here to make sure that our strategy is aligned to the business, but we're protected to kind of operate. So some of the tangible things, what does that look like? I think firstly, it was a very clear Fund 2 mandate, which is reflective of what the team believed we needed to be successful, as well as aligned to the business. And that was a lot of deep work went into, okay, not just where does BAT want to invest, but where are the investable spaces within the categories we're supporting? Because marrying BAT's wishes with actually where investors are putting their capital could be two different things. And lots of scientific work went behind the different territories. Again, marrying the art and the science of the two different worlds. So actually having a piece of paper with our Fund 2 mandate, which was the team could get behind the whole business or certain stakeholders within the business who needed to know, were aware and supportive of, to allow us to then execute, I think was the real big driver. The second piece, which we're in the process of looking to deploy, is this portfolio growth function, as it were. I think, again, listening to the feedback from our founders, how BTV could win and support them better as an investor was really bring that strategic lens and help us post investment. And I think the team spent time there, but when you think about resourcing, it's very different being a strong, good investor to being a good portfolio manager. Slightly different profiles, people perhaps with commercial acumen or experience growing a business themselves. So we haven't yet done it, but we are looking to hire people for portfolio growth. It's something I've spoken to some of the TDK team about. I think you guys are very good at that. Speaking to partners as well within the industry and who have been really great. I've been really grateful at the level of sharing people are doing within the CVC world. I think that was one overwhelming appreciation I had, was it's people feel like it's a 1 + 1 = 3, and it's not this hugely competitive, well, I'm going to withhold this, or I'm not going to share this because I'm keeping that to myself. It's a real partnership mindset, which has been really helpful in us bringing that outside perspective into BTV. And I think a key part of what we're trying to do as well is unlock the value of BAT. There's huge expertise within the corporate, from technical R&D, regulatory engagement, scientific expertise, which we've perhaps done in certain places, but we probably haven't done a systematic offering to our portfolio. So we've been asking our founders, what are the areas where you would want support? And now we're trying to bring BAT talent closer to BTV to help us partner with our startups. And again, it sounds like quite easy on paper, but actually getting and mobilizing that as a program is going to take a little bit of time. But again, the founders want it. BAT employees really want it. Of course, you have the challenge of people have very busy day jobs. Getting them to invest their time when they're resource constrained is never going to be easy, but it's something they really want to do. So how do we facilitate that? So that's, I guess, we're aware of that need and how we can win, but we haven't yet deployed that piece. We've then, I guess, just done the more of a reorganization of resource and making sure we have the right people doing the right roles, focused on the right things. So really looking at our investment team and do they have the right capabilities, as well as other support areas we want to bring in. So we've had a couple of new joiners starting in the team, and we've got a couple more joining in the next few weeks, just to make sure we can support this broadened mandate. And then I think the final thing, which probably isn't to be underestimated, is just getting our word out there within BAT. I think perhaps in the eras previously, it was more about going fast, so go alone. Whereas now I think we want to go far, so we want to go together. So really investing behind making sure people understand who we are, what we do, how we support the business, and who our portfolio companies are, and what that might look like in terms of the day-to-day BTV responsibilities. And I still think, again, we're quite early on in that journey. We've sort of built our framework. We've started kind of the senior level conversations, but we sort of want to take that now to the next level across the wider BAT organization, because that's linked to the point I mentioned previously, which is how do we better mobilize BAT expertise? Well, if they know what we do and they know what we're focused on, they'll be more supportive and more engaged. So they're kind of the key things we're working on.
Very nice. You reminded me of a African proverb, which is, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go hard, go together.
Yes.
And take your time. There's also something quite special about you, is that you moved into the head or the managing director role of a CVC from inside the company, but you were not in the company for long. You were 2 years in the company. So probably enough for people to see something.
Yeah.
It's not like you were there for 20 years and you have an established network. And there's a challenge of an exploration mission where you're going to look at where the mothership is not yet engaged. Can you share a little bit about what you thought was important in the definition of your role as managing director? What it is that you were sure you wanted that role to be about, and what the role is not about?
Oh, good question. And you're right. I think I was lucky in my previous role that it had a level of visibility, which kind of got me into conversations with both senior employees, but also various people across the business. I think that really helped with my credibility, buy-in, whatever you want to call it. Then in terms of kind of the leader I wanted to be, I've because my last few roles, I haven't been the subject matter expertise. I have developed, I guess, more of a leadership style of empowering my team and providing for them what they need to do a good job, and adapting my leadership as well to better bring the best out of them. So I've when I thought about what does the BTV team need, I think at the point I joined, we needed a better anchoring to BAT. I think as a corporate, they're our VACA. I still think there's this interesting tension between the corporate or the startups being the customer of the CVC, and I don't know if I have a perfect answer, but certain and can both be your customer and can you both be successful is a big question mark. But certainly we needed to engage with the corporate and better or show them now how we're anchoring ourselves to their strategy and to BAT strategy for the future, because there was I guess a question mark, or there was a certain, well, what's your plan? What's your strategy? And I think we hadn't reevaluated that since BTV's inception in 2019. So it was a really good moment that I started to pause and to anchor. I've always wanted to be a leader whose team, I guess, get on with it. They're empowered. They are the subject matter expertise. So I always wanted to create a structure, ways of working, routines where I wasn't the bottleneck. Because if I was a bottleneck, I'd be making all the wrong decisions because I didn't have that subject matter expertise. So how do you provide a North Star, a plan, a strategy? And I think one of the things I found quite helpful in that 9 months of kind of organizational change and redesign was just reminding the team, what am I, Annie, focused on? What are my priorities? And having this one slide I'd get up each time saying, right, here are my projects. It's what does the organizational design look like? How are we progressing against our strategic narrative? All the things which I guess they weren't necessarily touching their day-to-day, because their day-to-day continued. They continued to manage the portfolio. They continued to look at follow-on investments. But this was the I guess that North Star, that strategy piece, which obviously I worked on with the team, but it was sort of me as the, I guess, the new face, the senior leader that I was working on. I didn't want to be a manager as well who made false promises. I think that's really hard when you're trying to change things and anchor people into, I guess, the unknown. Like, we weren't sure if our new Fund 2 mandate would get approved. So it's always hard to say, we're going to change this, but actually there's certain variables down the line outside of your control. But I have always had the mindset, if it's the right thing to do, if it's for the business and it's ultimately going to benefit the corporate, there's always ways around things. We can tweak things, we can change things. And that's a bit of a mindset I try and apply to daily life, and drives my husband insane, is that there's always a way around something. You can find a way in, a way out. There's always a way. And I think,
As long as you're genuine about the right reasons.
yes, exactly. And I think that was one thing we were always very clear on, is we are anchoring to BAT. We are anchoring to what the long-term transformation agenda looks like. And we're also bringing this feedback from our founders as to what they want to see more of, as to how we've shown up in the good ways from Fund 1, and then what we can do to better improve as well. So I think the key thing really was trying to marry those two worlds. And maybe that's not the right approach. Maybe it's better to pick a lane and either satisfy the corporate or satisfy the partners, but certainly who we are as BAT, I think this is the right approach for us. And touch wood, so far, obviously we're just starting now making investments against Fund 2, but certainly the team the BTV team seem to be engaged and excited by the new strategy. And also our senior stakeholders feel like we're prioritizing the right areas. So for me as an MD, that's my job, is to keep this back to the high alignment, high autonomy model, keep the alignment very high with our senior stakeholders, to give my team, who are really here to invest and to grow our portfolio, to allow them to execute. So as a leader, that's what I always try and do, is almost just get out of the way in order to allow the team to do its thing. And with the corporate side of venturing, there's always an element of stakeholder management. And it's actually something I guess I feel like I could bring to the role, because that's what I've been doing for the last several years. And whilst I think to some people they might find that frustrating, to me that's a real interesting challenge of getting the challenging and teasing and finding the sweet spot between what those two worlds want.
I mean, again, I'm very impressed you didn't rush into it. You took your time to secure high alignment. I think for me, this is a golden nugget, is you really took the time to ensure high alignment so that then you can execute, then you can make commitments, versus trying to make commitments, which then you will have to retract. So that one is really good. I'll share you my opinion about who is a customer.
Yes, please.
Because I think that that's an important one. I think first, my opinion is that if you say the customer are both the mothership and the entrepreneurs, that's a total mistake, because you're going to end up with corner use cases where if you haven't said who is a customer, you're going to end up with inconsistent behaviors by your team, because they end up being the ones picking. I actually think that there's huge merit in deciding the customer is a mothership, and the same for the entrepreneurs. What's important is to pick so that you have consistency, and consistency means you deliver value on a consistent basis, which builds your brand. And so I can see the merits where it's the mothership and you're very clear in the messaging to entrepreneurs saying our customer is BAT. We are here to help them refine their long-term strategy. You're part of that. We want you to be part of it. You will be our partners, and hopefully we will help you grow. Great. Or you can say, Mr. Entrepreneurs, you're the customer. We're going to make sure you're growing, and BAT is a shareholder. We want to bring value to them, but we know that in our ecosystem, it all starts with the entrepreneurs. You can see how you could make the case for both, but saying that they are both, I think, will destroy your credibility at some point in time. And I've heard it so many times, and I'm sure it's so true, is it takes decades to build a brand and it takes 10 minutes to destroy it. And typically that's when you're inconsistent with your values and your messaging.
Yeah, and I think you made a good point about being clear up front, and that's something I don't think we weren't clear up front in Fund One. I think it was more we were finding our way as to who we were as an investor and how it was BTV's first time doing this. And I think to your point on why we took our time, in the last 9 months, we had a lot of learnings from Fund One that we wanted to go through to synthesize, and that to be the basis on which we started to redesign Fund Two. And I think that was actually quite consistent feedback we had, was it felt sometimes that priority shifted, or we thought this, but actually it didn't materialize. So I think that's, to your point, that's one thing we're really leaning into, is being really clear with the portfolio companies and our investment up front as to how we can support them and what type of an investor we want to be. And actually within our Fund Two mandate, we have what we call two pathways. Naming wise, they're a little bit clunky, but we have strategic capitalization, which is where we're probably going to invest really for companies with very high strategic alignment to BAT, and perhaps that's where you see BAT as the customer. And then we have venture growth, where you might not necessarily see a path to integration yet. So it's all about how do we provide optionality for BTV, BAT, and allow the startup to grow. So rather than having this kind of clunky corporate on the cap table who have all these strategic rights and blocking certain things because we have a board seat, actually, how do we allow this company to thrive, to grow and succeed, where we're more of watch and wait in the background because we perhaps don't know yet, is this a path to integration company, or is this an interesting financial play? So perhaps to kind of answer your question, what we've recognized those tensions because it's led to some I never like the word mistakes. So I always think if you learn from them, it's not a mistake, it's just a learning. But we've learned from some of the things we did in Fund One and approached it in that respect. So almost we have those two customer approaches depending on what type of investment we have. And we have an investment toolkit as to how we invest based on, is it strategic capitalization or is it venture growth? Because BAT's position and role as an investor looks very different in those scenarios. So I think perhaps almost that's how we've tackled that.
I like it a lot, actually. I think to me that sounds like a very solid strategy with a appropriate messaging for both. But now let me double click on this. Between these two categories, does your investment process, does your investment approval differ? Do you look for different champions? Do you look for different way of thinking about the investments? Do you look at different check size? How do you differentiate in terms of execution of an investment between the two?
It's a good question, and I'm going to answer hypothetically because it's in process and we're yet to kind of make a fund two investment. But how we see this as it's like deploying those two investments. So if you think about strategic capitalization, a huge part of success there is going to be integrating and finding partnerships with BAT. So that investment requires a sponsor. On the venture growth side, we're not going to be investing in areas that aren't aligned to BAT. So the overall territories remain the same, but so we're not investing in rubber ducks or dishwasher tablets or self-driving technology. But perhaps we're investing in something which wouldn't have a stakeholder because it's so far beyond BAT thinking about integrating this capability, or people don't have the time to think that far ahead. So in that case, we probably will have aligned with the business. We've got expertise that we wouldn't want to ignore if we're looking at let's for argument's sake, say a last mile logistics company. It would be in Brazil. It would be silly for us to ignore the feedback of the Brazilian market and to consult with them to say, is this a business challenge that can solve things for you? But if it's within the venture growth bucket, then they're not a business sponsor. It's just part of our decision-making process that we align with people who might know more than us. Down the line, it might be that venture growth investment becomes meaningful and we say, actually, now we invested in this company for optionality and we were more of a hands-off investor, but the way the company's developed, the way that our business also has merged at the same time, we now think that is a strategic capitalization investment and we're going to bring in more support. To your question on does the IC look different, we will be bringing in kind of a guest to our ICs, hopefully. That's something we went to a big discussion about. If it's a different way of investing, how do we make sure someone who's perhaps more familiar with the VC world can provide a seat at the table? So for that side of things, we'll be inviting kind of an external guest to be the voice of things. But I think our IC composition in itself blends the corporate and the startups quite well in terms of who we've chosen. So as always, we try and balance those things, but certainly that external lens will help with the venture growth pathway and investments that sit within that area.
It's really good. And then you're making the point why I like to interview people who are just 1 year fresh into a CVC because they are thinking new. And what I like is that you're already thinking about two paths with the customers being different. The strategic capitalization needing sponsor, the venture growth not needing it, but guests and inputs. But also there's a way for you at some point going beyond optionality where you upgrade the venture growth back to, or up to the strategic capitalization path. And it could well be that your follow investments then are following that path versus venture growth. So I think you're thinking it really well, and I want to see how you're going to build it and execute it, because it's on the high level view. I think you're building the right design with the right constraints. So that's really nice to hear.
Yeah, and one of the things I feel really fortunate about with the C within a CVC is having access to people who know more than us, people expertise in the business. And sometimes it can feel quite overwhelming to think, well, why would BTV be able to invest in something when there's certain people in our business who know more than this? But I think one thing that's given me the confidence that we can play a meaningful role is we play a significant thing we can do is join those dots up, bring the external lens and marry, I don't know, category understanding with local market expertise, with R&D. I think within a corporate, everyone has very busy jobs. Even the best well-intentioned people don't speak every day. So that's a key thing and the team are trying to do is know who's working on what and seek out expertise as we're going through the territories and landscaping and scouting, sharing this technology with this expert within the business, because they're going to be able to assess that far better than us. Yes, we can say, is this an investable opportunity? But our vapor R&D person can advise, does this battery technology stack up versus what BAT currently has, but also what they've seen in the market. So I think that's a key thing as well, which we're pretty good at, and we've done that very well in the areas that we've scouted in and looked at to date, but we're now scope's got a bit bigger, so we're having to do that more across the business. And I think sometimes it can feel overwhelming because there's lots of people in BAT, but actually, one, as I said before, everyone's really willing to help, and two, I think it will help us shortcut some of the due diligence if we've got a technical expertise from the get-go saying, sorry, no, the IP doesn't stack up and actually it's not protectable, or X, Y, and Z, and hopefully then reduce friction and time wasted both for our teams, but also the startups. I think from speaking to some of them, there's nothing worse than sort of engaging in a due diligence process only down the line to find out that, oh, actually this thing means the company isn't investable, and that could have been found out through a conversation earlier on. So I think that's a big focus of the team over the next sort of few months, is really building our stakeholder, our relationship matrix internally to help us validate those external companies that will be coming through our pipeline.
Which is even more true for your strategic capitalization path.
Yes.
Because for your venture growth, by definition, would not have the experts.
Yeah. And I think why we came to that conclusion is because the transformation agenda is so big at BAT, we don't know what we don't know. And that's really the role of BTV. I think the company, rightfully so, 99% of people are focused on the next 1, 2, maybe 3 years. It's really our responsibility to be thinking, where are BAT going to be in the next 5, 10, 15 years? And because people aren't thinking there, that's the thinking we have to do. And of course, that's spreading some well-educated bets. That's connecting the dots between what we have and where we need to get to. And that's the role of venture growth. And the way I described it internally is we're the scouter bees that are looking for kind of the next hive that's going to generate honey. And to do that, you've got to be thinking beyond where those worker bees are spending all of their time. So yes, we might have people who could offer an opinion, but ultimately the goal here is optionality in places BAT aren't experts in. So we can only take so much of those opinions. And I guess that's protecting these two pathways and being very clear on the role that they play so they don't converge, because sometimes there could be, I think, a danger of trying to apply the strategic capitalization criteria to venture growth, but actually, no, this is how we protect that. And again, back to your earlier question, that's very much my role, is to make sure that the world's, the operating model, the purposes and the strategy is very clear and we follow it.
I think you're very cogent and articulate about it. So I'm sure the messaging is coming internally and externally really well. There is one term you used at the beginning of the interview, which I think came from your experience at ZX Ventures, but also today, is bridging startups and big companies. And it's like they should understand each other, but they are so different. And their way of thinking, their motivation, their goals, there's so many things to manage. Can you share some of the best practices, things you've seen working that you want to share with our audience?
So it's a really basic one, but I think it's one that can sometimes be overlooked, and it's just listening. I think sometimes as a corporate, we might impose what we think or what our expectations are, but actually the founders that we work with in the portfolio companies, they know their businesses really well, and not trying to shoehorn them into a place we want them to get to, but really taking the time to listen. And I don't think that people don't do it because they don't know to do it, but it's just taking that time to ask questions. And I think, again, what was really helpful about me coming in and getting to the position that we were with, changing everything, was just spending time with the founders and asking questions. What are your pain points? What are we good at? What are we bad at? And creating an environment where they felt like they could share. Because I think sometimes if you think, oh, we're an investor, I'm asking for follow-on capital in 2 months, I better not upset this person. But actually saying, I really value your feedback. Your success is important. Help me understand how we can do better. And just positioning the question, I think, in that way really helped the founders feel like they could share. And then I think it's one thing to listen and to ask those questions, but also to act on it. So I think that's been quite important as well, is okay, you told me this, now this is how we've responded, or you've mentioned this is how we've taken it on board. And if I just take an example, with we call it well-being and stimulation, and that's, I guess, a way of saying our functional food and drinks brands. They felt, I guess, disappointed that we weren't active in board meetings or ask questions. And I think, again, okay, well, let's correct that. And again, speaking with the team and saying, right, this is really important to our founder. Let's be an active participant, make sure we ask questions ahead of time. And it's really basic, right? It's not rocket science, but it matters to our founders. And small pieces of feedback afterwards have been, wow, really appreciated that. Asked good questions. Thank you. So again, it's not hugely rocket science, but it certainly that helps. I think on the BAT side, in fact, that was obviously leaning more into the bridge towards the startups. I think in terms of getting the best out of the corporate, I think what BTV and what corporate venture capital funds do is so different to the day-to-day. And people in the business who are focused on the 1, 2, 3 years have a lot of different pressures, right? They're chasing a number to hit for the month. The business's bonus targets depends on this market hitting this, and the competitors just decreased prices, and they're losing market share. Like, it's a really tough dynamic. And I think sometimes what the CVC is doing, which is longer term, in inverted commas, less pressure, because it's not in that kind of day-to-day hitting the monthly P&L, it can sometimes cause resentment. What are you doing for the business? I'm here grinding on the day-to-day, and you're there looking at the future. And it can feel like quite disconnected and quite unfair, which isn't right. But I think sometimes that pressure cooker and the perception can lead to those opinions. So I think really, one, empathizing with their day-to-day and talking about how we're anchoring to a better BAT for the future, and what we're doing now is going to have this impact in the future, and being mindful of that. I think one thing that BTV have done well in the last few months is operating within the business environment that we're in, where, yes, we have to do things differently to change, but also we're BAT employees. And when the company is going through something, we're in the same boat, or we're wearing that storm as well. So I think being empathetic and compassionate with our colleagues and behaving in line with, I guess, how the company's managing certain situations has been really important. And again, just better educating people on what we're doing helps with that bridge to help us understand. And I think finally, one thing I know that the team within BAT really like doing is they're really passionate about transformation. They see BTV's portfolio and some of the companies you've invested in as fast forwarding that, providing access to the products, providing access to the founders. I think bringing that external point of view in. So if one of the teams are hosting a barbecue, hey, take some of our caffeinated chocolate products awake with you, or take these caffeinated drinks with you, and providing access and saying, hey, try our brands, and being really open has been a way of bringing people on board as well. But I think one thing we really look for when we hire within BTV is high empathy individuals, because I think that empathy helps you see both sides. It helps you understand you're never going to or you might, if you have a golden candidate, you might, but it's hard to get people who have had those direct experiences because sometimes those experiences require different skill sets. But someone with empathy can put themselves in the founder's situation, can put themselves in the BAT colleague situation and find ways of bridging that gap and be skillful with how they communicate, because we're really just humans dealing with humans, and getting the best out of humans, I think, is often driven by empathy. So that's another way we do it. So
That's a great golden nugget to finish the interview, which is recruit for empathy, because that's how you're going to be able to build the best bridge possible between startups and big companies.
correct. I hope so. And it also creates a really nice team environment and people who enjoy kind of showing up to work together and collaborating. I think when you're facing business challenges with no roadmap, you have to listen, you have to be open to ideas and seeing different perspectives. So yeah, it's definitely a soft skill that's important to be successful here at BTV.
Annie, thank you so much for sharing your journey very candidly, very transparently, and showing what you're planning for Btomorrow Ventures. I think I look forward to seeing how it works out, but I think you're being very thoughtful with your team. Thank you.
That's kind of you to say. Thank you so much, Nicola. It was great to speak to you.